Hi everyone, and welcome to InfoSec Live, where we give you, our audience, the chance to learn from and interact with cybersecurity industry's leadership. And today we have a special episode where we're going to get to hear from Zach Kromkowski of Senteon, a turnkey cybersecurity platform designed to empower those forgotten by the large security corporations. And today Zach's going to be taking us through CIS benchmark alignment. But before we get to that, for those that haven't watched before, my name's Simon. I'm the founder of the InfoSec Live community and your host for this show. And by sharing stories and best practices over the last few months, it's led to nearly 250,000 views of our content here on YouTube by you, our amazing 11,400 subscribers. So a huge thank you for your engagement. And thanks to your support, it's also led to us hosting 13 community-driven leadership events across the UK and over the pond the last 13 months with a focus on knowledge sharing, networking, and definitely no sales pitches. So if you're a vendor and interested in sponsoring our events or even being featured on this channel, please do reach out to me today. You've got to do two things at once here when I bring up a QR code. You can get hold of me right here in the community where we have study groups, CV workshops, networking sessions, job alerts, and over 6,000 members helping each other every single day. So make sure you check out the community if you haven't already using that QR code right there. But whether you join or not, being here and engaging with our content today is what matters. So if you're watching this live, please do like and subscribe. We want to try and make these events as interactive as possible. So make sure you drop any questions in the chat. Okay, time for me to take a breather, get my breath back. Let's bring Zach on and dig into benchmarking and CIS alignment. Oh, there we go. Nearly seamless.
Got
How are
it.
you, Zach?
Doing great. Thank you for having me back on. This is round 2, Simon. Can you believe it?
It's my pleasure. You did say if you need any educational content, give me a shout. I shouted and you appeared. So I massively appreciate that. Thank
I
you.
love it. And great introduction again. Like I reached out because you, again, the second time, because of your post wanting to help new speakers who maybe have presentations coming up and haven't presented to a live audience before, right? So the content I'll be presenting today, I'm actually doing in person. And that's I really appreciate you letting me do a little practice round virtually to prepare for the in-person.
Not at all. And it's great educational content for the community as well. So for me, it's an absolute win-win. So rather than me run on and randomly say loads of stuff like I often do on this show, just a quick 2 minutes from you on who you are, what you do, and then I'm going to get you to crack on and show us what you've got to show us today.
That's perfect. So I'm a security entrepreneur, launched the company Senteon, which is developed for managed endpoint hardening. So what that actually means is your workstations, your servers, your browsers, there's thousands of settings that you can change to make more secure or less secure. And there's a standard called CIS, or there's a lot of regulatory recommendations. But our platform actually automates the remediation, the reporting, the change tracking, the modifications, monitoring, enforcement, X, Y, and Z about these settings. That's exactly what we do. We change settings and we try to make it exciting.
and how are you, I mean, you're doing an amazing job with the settings, but how are you getting on with the excitement there, Zach?
The excitement is a work in progress, if I must be honest, but there is a learning mode and I lean into that as much as I can. And honestly, I guess exciting news for your live audience. As of 8 p.m. last night, we had an update go live that has a fully customizable automation engine that is built into the platform now. So if Microsoft has a new print nightmare issue or CIS releases new recommendations or Senteon simply adds additional settings that you can harden with, we now have a about 30-point customization engine that you can configure, change, and as soon as you're happy and create your company standard, all you have to do is click automate, and it will go through all the new settings, and it will implement the choice based on your pre-populated decisions.
Love that. And I'd just like to mention one thing. whilst I bring up this QR code. If you want to check out
Oh,
Senteon, do check it out there. But I do want to make this very, very clear. This is not a sponsored episode. No money has changed hands. I'm not on commission. This is, whilst we're here to hear about Senteon, this is me giving Zach the platform to try and educate the community a bit today and get the message across. And I think it's important to make that clear because there's a lot of cynicism online sometimes about people supporting other people. They always think there's money involved, but there isn't. This is what a community is all about, sharing ideas and best practice. So I will now be quiet and hand over to you for that. I think
I
you've got a
actually want to.
presentation, haven't you?
I want to give a follow up on that comment. I
Go
know we
on.
got to go to the presentation, but what you said right there is so important to call out. And you're the second person to say that to me over the last, I think, 2 weeks. So a friend and partner of ours, Amanda from B4 Networks, she is going to be joining me on my webinar show. And she felt it was very important to call out that, hey, I am not actually a Senteon partner yet, right? You know, it's something
Yeah.
they're looking into, but she wanted to be part of this and associate her brand with us because it's about rising tides,
It
sharing
is.
education, and really diving into it. So it's really cool to hear you call that out and you doing the same thing. There is no money exchanging hands, but if you do
I mean,
write Simon in the
don't get me
contact
wrong.
form, maybe
Don't
there'll
get
be
me
something.
wrong. I do sponsored content, but if the
Mhm.
content's sponsored, I'll always let people know to start with because I think that's important. So yeah, no, I'm glad we're thinking the same on that. Over to you then, Zach. Let's get this presentation up.
Yeah, let's dive into it. So I will go ahead. I believe I have my share screen in the background, and we will give this a go in real time in Canva presentation if we can pull that up.
Just to give you a heads up, Justin Merhoff, great to see you in the audience there. Justin's also just put a comment in there saying, I'd love to learn more about Senteon, Zach. So perhaps you could
Oh,
follow
I'm
up with him
always happy
afterwards.
to do that. You want me to dive into it or you want me to go
If
into the
only I had a
presentation?
commission scheme worked out with you.
If you go to that QR code, go to the contact page and toss Simon's name in there, he will at least get some type of swag gift.
Just stickers. I'll have some stickers for the kids.
Do you want me
Okay.
to talk towards Senteon a little bit or you want to hop into the presentation?
No,
What's
I
best for
think
the
I'll
format?
bring the presentation, the first page up for you. But yeah, let's just give a bit of background on Senti and where it's come from as well.
Sure. And let's see if the present mode in Canva works and share screens correctly. That looks good on my end.
Boom.
All right. So, Justin, thank you for asking the question. So, Senteon really originated actually as an idea in college. So, something that we realized was the best practices, such as configuring your assets and hardening the OS, hardening the browser, is something they taught us in school as critical, right? Everyone does this. This is what you do. You get an asset, you configure said asset. What we realized after going to the real world was people weren't doing this, and it didn't make sense. If this was such a critical process, why would no one be doing it? And this dove us into, what's the challenges, what's the problem, what's the why? And ultimately it came down to is it's overwhelming and making a single change might break a workflow, cause end client complaints, whatever else, right? So we keyed that in as the number one challenge in inhibiting people from doing this. So the whole concept and premise behind Senteon is this concept of a learning mode. This learning mode determines how individual workstations, individual servers are utilized. And then it will take a recommendation list and tell you what you can handle versus can't handle. So effectively, you can say, hey, all of these settings can be aligned to the best practice standard without the user of that computer noticing. Alternatively, here's all the settings that if changed, that end user is going to be screaming, right? So now they get a recommended list of the safe ones, the ones that take a little bit more work to get towards, and it becomes their roadmap on how to improve their security posture. And that's the main premise. To take that a step further, we realized there was one other key challenge. There's two, but one really big one, and it's the big company in the room, Microsoft. So there's Intune, there's group policy, there's PowerShell, there's various applications that do some settings, but not all the settings. There's no single point of access to manage all thousands of these settings. And even though Intune tries, we've seen time and time again that there's no guarantee that Intune policy is successfully making the change. there's no validation. It doesn't change after it's remediated, right? So there's no feedback and there's no actual security attestation to, is this policy applying on the machine versus not. So Senteon took the stance of saying, hey, we do not trust Microsoft. We will not use group policy. We will not use Intune, and we do not use scripting. All of this is through an agent-based solution that is making direct changes via the Win32 API in the reg key, sec pool, and audit pool, because that's the only way from a security point of view you can guarantee that this setting does in fact change. So those were the two key challenges behind Senteon. The last challenge is all about compliance, reporting, change tracking. Way less exciting than the nerdy first two challenges that I like talking about. How's that for an introduction, Simon?
I think that's perfect. Thank you very much. There is another question actually in the
Yeah,
audience there.
pop it
From
up.
Prashon, are there plans to introduce a community edition of the product and limit to 2 to 5 devices, for example, for I suppose like mom and pops and individuals?
So this is a great question. We do actually have a freemium version. So you can actually do this by heading to app.senteon.co. You can hit sign up and you'll be promoted to our freemium version. This will come with everything I talked about, from the settings, the best practices, and the compliance crosswalks. And you can even perform reporting. There is no minimums as well. So we are very friendly to assisting those mom and pop shops with a friendly price point if you do want to perform the automated remediation. And if you're an MSP in the audience, we are happy to offer NFRs when it makes sense. So there is really ways we're happy to work with everybody.
Amazing. Thank you very much.
Awesome. So premise behind this, I hinted at it a little bit. Why am I here? Why did I really want this practice session? I'm giving my first ever longer than 5-minute presentation in real life. This is going on at ChannelCon, which is hosted by CompTIA. I imagine a lot of people in the audience probably know what CompTIA is already. So ChannelCon is their trade show where they invite their sponsored vendors to have a booth, attend workshops, keynotes, and I did apply. This presentation we'll be looking at today to be part of the hardening workshop. So a lot of this presentation is going to be tailored to engagement and hands-on, but I'm going to do my best to adjust that in real time and ask the hard questions to Simon so he can really send his skills in front of all of you. Sound okay with you?
It sounds terrifying. Thank you, Zach.
So keep that in mind. There will be some slides that maybe don't resonate as strongly as if it was a hands-on workshop, but no, I did adapt this to be the best for a virtual presentation. And again, thank you to Simon and InfoSec Live for letting me give this as a practice run through. So with that, security enhancements with CIS hardening techniques. So to kick off this presentation, I want to first, set out the agenda, right? We're going to start very high. We're just going to talk about what is currently understood, what's going on in the market today, how are we handling our security, and then we're going to get into the more technical weeds of determining what are those challenges, how can I do this without buying Senteon, right? How can I do this manually? What am I going to have to come across, and how am I going to have to make some actions? And hopefully you get a kick out of point number 6, right? I mean, we all have to actually make some acts. So do note, I tried to be a little edgy, right? Obviously, professional in-person presentation, but if you have comments, drop them, please. This is my first time showing this presentation to anyone, right? I've a couple peers, but overall, first time actually presenting it. So if you do have comments, questions, drop them in real time. Simon will shout them out at me, and I will interact. That's the whole point of this.
Amazing.
So
thanks, Zach.
Let's dive into it. We will be having a survey, but for purposes of the virtual, we're going to bypass the survey part. But asking the audience if you're familiar with the CIS controls or not. So really quick, for those of us not familiar, CIS is a global organization, a nonprofit that is dedicated to creating the best practice security recommendations. What's cool about this is they have 18 different controls and a lot of different sub-controls, but those 18 controls is effectively a prioritized roadmap on how a business that's just starting to consider about security or looking at creating a security plan, where to start. So control 1 is talking about hardware asset inventory. Control 2, software asset inventory, right? So very much, you can't secure it if you don't know it's there. So it's a very much tailored list of priorities. And number 2 here, CIS benchmarks. So these are also what facilitate some of those controls. These benchmarks is what built Senteon. So when I talked about configuring your workstation servers and browsers, that wasn't me, Senteon, telling you to do this. Senteon is a medium to implement those changes that CIS already tested, recommended, and proved was the correct choice. So these CIS benchmarks are a lot. There's over 1,000 recommendations on just those 3 platforms I'm talking about, but it adds up to about 4,000 pages of PDFs.
Wow.
Simon, would you read 4,000 pages on a flight home after my workshop?
I'd probably get to page 2. Yeah.
And one of those is just the title page.
Are there pictures?
So, no pictures in that either. So
no,
that's the big thing here is, and going back to the challenges of why Senteon was created, no one has the time to read this. And I think I actually call out. So that is alone just to configure a Windows workstation. Almost 1,500 pages of documentation and almost 500 recommendations. And it's not just reading it when you do this manually. You have to, of course, make the scripts, make the policy, make sure the policy sets, right? Making sure it works. So there's so much to it. And I love what Mad Dog Frost tossed in the comments. Simon can power through. We all know he can. But there's so much to hear, and it's not just reading it. It's understanding each setting, knowing what impact it might have in the environment. So all in all, it's just a lot of information. And the last question here, no, well, kind of, sort of. It goes into my little meme here. So PowerShell, Intune, group policy. Is this a security function or security tool? So Simon, this is your first workshop question. Do you consider Intune, PowerShell, and group policy to be an actual security tool?
Oh, no, but probably should be.
I agree, it probably should be. But the reason I would push and say it's not is because of the meme right here, right? When you make a change, you get no validation. Was it successful? And maybe you do create a follow-up script. Was output successful? But you can't continuously run these scripts to make sure it stays in that successful state, right? You push an Intune policy. It changes a week later. How do you know? So in our point of view at Senteon, that's why we don't use those mediums. We don't consider those mediums from Microsoft to be true security tools. And they are a security risk. I love that. I mean, that's a reality, right? These settings, we talk about SMB1 or other deprecated networking protocols, LLM&R, right? There's hundreds I can name off, but they all relate back to the MITRE ATT&CK framework, and they can mitigate risk when they are configured correctly. So how's slide 1 of content going, Simon? Did you like the opening
it's
here?
Good, but easier questions on the next one, please.
I love it. All right, so let's dive into this. So key thing here, functional does not mean secure. Simon, do you agree with that statement or do you disagree?
I disagree with that statement.
You disagree. Interesting.
Yeah. I'm just being awkward.
So if things are functional, that means they can be also secure, or rather functional does not mean secure, which, man, you threw me off, brother.
Sorry.
So functional does not mean secure is basically saying here, just because it works and just because you can do your job, that doesn't mean the machine is in the most optimal security state.
Okay, yeah, no, I completely agree. Sorry, I read that wrong.
But that's important feedback for me because maybe I wrote the sentence a little wrong. So no, that's why we do this.
It's probably me, Zach. Yeah.
So that's the big thing here I want to emphasize, right? Just because you can work with that computer and you can run your business, it doesn't mean that computer is as locked down as it could be. And that's a big thing I want everyone to really realize before we dive into it, right? And I have a little funny subtitle here, defaults are the enemy. I try to break it up, right? Default security settings, right? This is fine, right? You're sitting in a house, your coffee's hot, right? You're doing your thing. You don't know it, but everything's burning around you, right? and hopefully today, checking out the girlfriend walking, right? Before today, we'd all be looking at default settings excited, and we'd be ignoring security configuration management. But after today, Simon is going to change his tune, and he's going to be like, oh, got to lock down my computers.
I do have an IT department for that. So it's my 19-year-old son. I'll be instructing him to lock down my computers. Yeah.
I love it. So that is diving into that, and that's going to be the premise for this presentation here. But let's dive into it. So Simon, I mean, you have your own business, right? And do you have computers at your business? Are you on a computer right now?
I am. Yes, I'm on a MacBook.
That's amazing. Now, when you bought this MacBook from, maybe you bought it from a distributor, bought it from a Best Buy, right? When you get that computer, it might look something like this, right? It's functional. You can use the house, you can use the computer, but you don't actually know where the vulnerabilities are because it works, right?
Yeah.
So this is every MSP. When you get a new client, you take on their new computers, you inherit the risk that they're already accepting without really realizing it, right? And you have this. Now, if you're an enterprise as well, right? When you buy your your HPs, whatever, from Ingram Micro or whoever your large reseller is, right? They're going to send you this machine straight off the shelf, and it could be something like this. No settings in place. Only 20% of a Windows machine is actually secure by default, right? So there's a lot of holes that are innately in these machines if we don't make changes. So the first thing we do when we get this
So
new
let
machine,
me jump in with
yeah,
that question then. So are they
please.
sending them out 20% secure because if they did it anymore, it would reduce people's functionality, or is there another reason behind that?
So Windows is the computer for your grandma and the Fortune 100 enterprise. So you're absolutely right. They want to appeal to the masses as opposed to having a secure by design mindset. So that's a perfect question and right there. Did that make sense?
It did. Yeah. Thank you.
Cool. So as business owners and MSPs who take on new clients, the first thing we do is we patch the hole in the house and we replace the doors and windows, right? That's what we do. Well, from what I've seen, we install an EDR. That's the first thing we do because an EDR is going to stop every bad guy from getting to our house. So we ignore the house for a little bit. We ignore the computer. We just install an EDR. Okay. And hey, that's something. I mean, that does look a little bit safer. And maybe we do go back and we do configure some of these policies. I've talked about them there being well over 1,000 different ways to lock down a computer, right? Maybe you do the top 3 most important thing or the top 20 most important things, but very rare have I come across someone who is doing all 1,000 of these recommendations. So maybe you toss some locks on the doors and windows. And if you're good, maybe you even toss up some whitelisting or a fence around the house, right? And if you're really good, get some monitoring tools, some scanning tools. So at least you now know what's going on. But the big thing here is you never actually fixed the source of the problem, and let alone that your employees aren't even working within where you think they are, right? So they're now connecting to an insecure host with no VPN. They're out there in the wild, and you don't necessarily know what's going on. So the goal of this here is to really paint the visual. What's the thought process when we build a security posture? When we go through our security stack, we have to build upon a foundation. That foundation is the computer defaults. Your best bet and your best bang for your buck that you don't even have to have a vendor to do, right? You can simply configure the OS, configure the browser, configure the assets, and that's going to allow you to really have a system where you have the same security layers, right? This is all about defense in depth, which I haven't talked on yet, but now you have all the same layers and you have a secure house, right? And one question I might get, or I'm anticipating, why is the hole, that tunnel, still outside the door? That hole isn't gone, right? Well, that is what we'd call accepted risk, right? You can't eliminate all risk, but you can secure around that risk. So very cool here. And as always, you still can't control your employees to use the VPN or not, but at least you can secure their endpoints and configure them before they do so. So how is this metaphor in this engaging workshop? Simon, are you getting excited about how this fits in the greater security picture?
It's funny you should say that. Excited might not be the right word, but It's brilliant for me because I'm a complete visual learner. So the way you've related it to a physical house with the physical security attributes, I think works brilliantly from an engaging the audience, especially for someone who isn't inherently technical like myself.
That's awesome to hear. Now that's absolutely the goal, because the audience at the workshop, I do anticipate to be a mixture of, business owners who aren't necessarily technical, C-levels, and obviously engineers will
Yeah.
definitely understand how they've potentially skipped the step of configuring the asset. So awesome to hear this resonated with you, Simon. All right. So diving past that, CIS and the secret sauce of hardening. So the foundation of secure configuration. Simon, I already know you're screaming. I don't know what the hell is on this slide. You're not supposed to. The goal is not to read this slide. So
That's
I
good.
do I do want to educate again on CIS and what CIS is. So of those controls, control 4.1 is to establish and maintain a secure configuration process. That is such a encompassing statement alone. So this is actually from a workshop I did with Matt Lee from PAX 8 and a dozen other people. And we identified all 153 of the safeguards or the subcontrols of CIS. And we determined which other subcontrols facilitated or assisted with meeting that individual requirement. And you can see here, there's 43 different green bubbles representing 43 different controls. This is ranging from configure your DNS, right? And deploy and maintain email anti-malware protections, right? So it's not just, when I talk about hardening, I'm not just talking about changing settings. I'm talking about so much more, making sure you know the asset inventory, making sure you have MFA in place, making sure you have all the system services removed that you're not using, right? There's so much that goes into this that you absolutely should consider an automated solution to at least knock out as much as you can, because this stuff is 43 today, but it continuously updates. There's new CVEs, new recommendations released pretty often, and it's overwhelming for whoever your engineer is manages GPO, right? They now have to keep up with it, make sure all of it works, update. It's so much. So I think
So hold on,
Microsoft
hold
just
on.
just
You're
yeah.
telling me that your platform does that automatically? This is a genuine
It
question.
does. It's not
Okay.
meeting all 43 of these different points, but it is taking a chunk of them away for you.
Okay.
So that is the goal here, right? For the workshop is just to engage on. We haven't been doing hardening for the last 2 decades, Zach. Why should I start doing it now? Well, we ignored it for long enough, and here's why. It is the foundation. It is the core of your security plan, right? And this is all the things that feed into it. So again, slide is not necessarily for reading. This is just to really understand what's going on.
So put this into context with the cybersecurity market at the moment. There's a lot of vendors out there, going back to your
Mm-hmm.
picture of the house, doing the peripheral bits. But what
Yep,
you're saying is get the foundations right first before you even think about that.
absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
keeping with the house example, if I mean, let's so I lived in New Orleans for a handful of years, right? Would you want to build your house in the swamp, right? And then build a beautiful mansion with the most up-to-date gadgets and the most incredible security, a pool, everything, like all this fun stuff on top of a swamp?
Well,
Or
I'd
would
say
you
a normal person wouldn't. Where we live in East Anglia, we've got severe coastal erosion about 25 miles away from where we live, and people are still buying houses, which are probably going to last 10, 20 years. So there are a few
people
crazy people out there who do that, but as a rule, Zach, no.
pe- people are still using computers without changing a single setting. So
Very
both
good. Yeah.
places. But the point here is, and also with your coastal erosion, typically you don't want to build the house on that location without actually putting a concrete foundation or putting, the poles, or making sure the erosion can't go more inland and break my foundation, because all those fancy gadgets that are on top of the foundation are incredible, right? I'm
Yeah.
not bashing the EDRs of the world. That's incredible tech. But if that foundation breaks, what's that fancy tech worth?
I think my grandmother used to call it all fur coat and no knickers, I think is the saying. Prashant has asked a question in the chat there. I'll bring it up on the screen so you can read
Yep.
it. That's the obvious host hardening. How does one deal with DMARC SPF hardening via
This is
CIS?
going to be so much. This is perfect question for the workshop, but this is going to be way more technical of an answer than the live webinar. So I will happily follow up after the show on that one.
Perfect. Thank you.
But absolutely good question, and definitely keep them rolling in. I do want to keep this as inclusive as possible to the audience with not going too deep on stuff people I know may not understand completely.
He's talking about me there, folks, and I appreciate it. Thanks, Zach.
All right, so let's dive a little bit further. Again, I do my best to break this up. So you might be looking at this and you're like, Zach, quit talking about all these Windows settings. I know all of them, right? And people will say, we don't need the CIS benchmarks, right? But let's take a moment and talk about the concept of defensibility. So defensive. Oh, and I can hide this. There we go. Let's talk about defensibility. So if a breach does happen, oh, I said the B word. If an incident does happen and you need to prove the actions you were taking or you need to attest to something, what's the stronger story? And Simon, here's your next question. What's the stronger story? I, business owner, decided to change these settings because I felt like they were the right choice, or I, business owner, changed these settings because CIS, this global organization, told me it was the right choice.
Yeah,
What's the
100%.
better story if you were telling a judge?
100% the second story with a documented process around it. Yeah.
Yep. So that's the thing. You might be looking at this and you're like, hey, I've already done everything. I mean, going back to process, like I've already configured my DMARC and everything else, right? That's great. That's awesome. But doing your internal best practices, when you do have to report on that incident or prove why you made the actions you took, would you rather lean into a body of authority who already made the decisions, or would you rather justify your stance to someone who doesn't know your expertise?
From
So
someone who had a business in regulated financial services for 15 years, I definitely know the answer to that is not relying on your own skill and judgment. It's relying on the experts and governing authorities around.
yes, absolutely. All right.
See,
So
I knew that one.
that was perfect. You nailed the defensibility one.
Keep them coming.
All
Like
right.
that. Yeah.
So after this, we are going to dive a little bit deeper, right? We're going to get down and dirty with the plan because this is a workshop. I don't want anyone to leave here today saying, well, that was a cool presentation. I don't know what to do now. I'm going to give you something to do, right? So first and foremost, pick a framework, right? I'm praising CIS here today, but there's plenty of other ones. We choose CIS as a company because they're very prescriptive in what they say. For example, they say, setting X needs to be configured to Y. Setting Z needs to be configured to A. They tell you explicitly what to do, while other frameworks or regulatory items like NIST or ISO will say, hey, you need to have a secure authentication, right? Or you need to have a secure login process, right? They don't tell you how to do something. They just say you need to do it.
Again,
so
that
CIS,
reminds me a bit about regulated financial services because we had outcome-based regulation, which means they told you what the outcome was that they wanted, but they wouldn't actually give you any guidance as to how to get there, which was extremely frustrating.
that is exactly why I will encourage you to pick CIS, but do what you need to do. After you do that, identify the assets in scope. So don't try to, do this all at once, right? CIS is massive. There's a lot to do, even if you're just looking at hardening, right? So start with just the assets that are servers. Start with just the Win 10 machines or the standalone machines or the domain. Try to tackle this in sections as opposed to all at once. But of course, do what's best for you. And the most important step that people love, documentation. Write down your process, and that documentation is going to lead you to that final step of creating a plan, right? So just making sure you follow these 4 steps is going to set you up for success. And you might be looking at this and saying, Zach, like, yeah, I know I need to create a plan, but what's going into a plan? So I did think of that next question. So the blueprint here, right? What goes into making a plan? So again, the presentation premise here today is talking about just about OS or application hardening, right? And there's 5 key things you really need to consider when you're making your plan, right? Where's my initial assessment? Where do I sit today? How am I going to make the changes? How am I going to make sure the changes take place? How am I going to make sure the changes stay, right? The monitoring. And then how am I going to attest to these changes after it's all done at any point in time? So those 5 steps are what I consider the key pieces of the plan at a high level. Now, we're going to go deeper than this. But Simon, did I lose you? How are we feeling? Is this going at a good rate?
And even with my minimal technical knowledge, I'm with you, Zach. I'm hanging in there and I'm understanding every word. Thank you.
I love it. And feedback for me, I mean, this is my first time doing it. How's my pacing on this, Simon? Give me some live on-air feedback.
I think it's fine. There's no criticisms at all from me. You've been very clear in what you've said. You haven't hung around on different points. So no, brilliant. I think fantastic.
Awesome. Appreciate it. All right. So let's dive a little bit deeper into the hardening blueprint. So this is going to be a little overwhelming. So I have the 5 parts of the plan listed along the left-hand side. And as this is agnostic, right? Simon did say at the beginning, this is not a sponsored episode. I'm going to talk about things that you may already have in your shop. Obviously, Senteon is here to replace a lot of these processes, but we are going to talk about what you can do today with the tools you might have at your disposal. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about the initial assessment. Maybe you want to do this via Intune. I will note, I've done the work for you. Intune does not really have a way to do a report easily. You'll notice group policy does have a way to do this manually. You can run a GP edit command and you can see the policies on the machine, but it's not very centralized. You can't see all of the endpoints at once. And PowerShell, you're going to notice PowerShell as we do populate all these cells. PowerShell is the way to go if you do have a zero budget and an incredible brain that can create all these custom scripts and whatnot. But I will note the majority of people I work with and the majority of the people coming up in the space, I don't think PowerShell is going to be the most reliable choice at scale, but to each their own. So initial assessment, it's difficult to do. Intune isn't going to be the best source of truth for this. Group policy will be a little bit better, but they don't have a really at scale way to manage it or way to review it, right? You can check what the group policy is set to at the domain level, but you can't really check the local policy at scale. And that the local policy is what matters. And maybe I should do a pause right there. There is a difference between local group policy and domain group policy. So when I talked about Senteon making these changes in the reg key, sec pool, audit pool, right? That's Senteon making changes at the local group policy level. That's because that's the only way to guarantee that these settings are being changed to the desired state. When you're doing this via domain and anything else, it's only pushing that change for that point in time. It's not actually guaranteeing it's doing anything or giving you that feedback. So felt like that was worth mentioning. All right, let's go into part 2 of the plan. How are you going to make these changes? So again, Intune totally can do this. If you have an Intune license, this is a good place to start. They have some good usability around templates. I have opinions on templates. So templates, when you apply, for example, Senteon 1200 settings, if you apply all of these and just hit on, go, you might break a lot of stuff. Turning all of this on at once, it could cause disaster, right? And there's no way within Intune to hit the undo button, right? That's a Senteon feature. There's no undo button in Microsoft. Once you make that action, God bless your soul. So Intune here is going to be complex to use. There's limited granularity, and you do need to have an expert. But this is a good point to start. I think they might have some like levels of template that are safer than others. I'm not an Intune expert here. I just know what I know. Group policy here, another good one. This one here, if you configure with the group policy and have Intune, there might be some conflicts. So you do need to make sure if you're configuring with group policy that your domain, your Intune level is also not fighting with group policy. And then again, PowerShell, absolutely the way to go here. Super difficult and hard to do at scale, especially if you don't have an SME on site. So those are the first 2 parts of the plan. Diving into verification, I actually talked about Intune here not having a native rollback. And this verification, this is This is probably the most important part that Microsoft really doesn't have a chance to do. So I'll actually share a short story here. When Senteon was built, when we remediated these settings on a Windows workstation, we actually, Microsoft didn't know we made the changes. That's weird. Why would Microsoft not know? Verification. That's why. Intune group policy, well, PowerShell when it runs, is not checking, is this still to the state it's supposed to be? They actually cannot pull the status of the reg key, of sec pull, of audit pull. It can only push. So when we made these changes outside of their mediums, they didn't know it happened. Even though it behaved as a hardened device, Microsoft didn't know. And then eventually, once it did its verification at whatever timestamp that they don't tell you about, because Microsoft keeps their secrets, then it will try to change it back, but a lot of times it will fail, right? So that's a critical thing, and why the question back to the start, Simon, why I don't consider these options to be true security solutions.
Yeah.
But as with anything, starting somewhere is going to be better than starting nowhere. All right, monitoring. Again, monitoring verification are pretty similar. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but very, very similar. It's only push. There's no actual pull to make sure it's in the right place. So there's literally no monitoring to these systems. PowerShell, again, whenever it runs the script, of course that's checking if you wrote the script correctly. Reporting. This is probably the most interesting category to me. I feel, as a person, Microsoft should provide Intune with the most incredible reporting possible. I have been told they don't in the respect to configurations. I do believe Intune is doing a great job at the 365 hardening level. They are starting to make advancements in that space. But so 365 hardening is, I guess, what you call like cloud hardening. This is the 365 tenant hardening, right? Hardening the cloud is important. I'm not downplaying that at all. But you also need to harden the endpoints, whether they're VM endpoints, whether they're on-prem, off-prem. It doesn't matter. You need to do both. It's like, I mean, if you what's a hard shell candy with like a juicy center, like one of those chocolates with the cherry flavoring in the center, right? You can't just harden the top half of that candy. You need the whole encompass, otherwise the juice is going to fall out. So that's my tidbit on reporting. I do think Intune should do it, but they absolutely don't. Group policy, I talked about this. You can do it on the domain level. You can definitely do that with GP edit. That's not horrible. It's not very usable, but it does generate a report. And then, as always, you can do anything in PowerShell. You just got to know how to do it.
So Zach, with the customers you're speaking to at the moment, what methods are they using to do reporting on this? Is it like
Yeah.
a manual effort with loads of different pieces, or what is the story that you're hearing out there?
So this is a really good question here. What we see is a lot of scanning tools. So there are an abundance of scanning tools on the market, like Nexus, Qualys, Tenable, right? Those tools will perform a scan. So it's going to look at whether it's the individual endpoint level or the domain level. It depends on the solution, but it will check all of the current points of status from a scan. Now, those scans are absolutely good enough for a audit, but those aren't built in. So I'm trying to keep this as like, agnostic, free as possible.
Sure.
But yeah, you're doing this today with a third-party scanning solution. The shortcoming with that is it's a scanning solution.
Yeah.
All of those reds, all of the things the scan tells you to perform, they can't do it. They might give you directions, but they can't do it. So if you really want to actually do this effectively, plugging my own company, like Senteon will generate these scans and actually fix the things we tell you are wrong.
Yeah, brilliant.
So a little bit of an intense slide here, Simon. Did I break? I mean, it's a workshop. I'm going to talk a lot slower in the workshop, but how did we feel this flowed for you?
Really well. I think you didn't have to spend any more time on any of it. I think the understanding was there. It's kind of prompted me to ask the question after seeing this. It made me wonder what companies are actually doing to solve this problem at the moment, and the answer is probably not a lot other than manual
No,
intervention.
Not a lot is definitely right. But I will note we are seeing a spike in conversations caring about security posture, cyber hygiene, and I mean these topics are coming. I don't know exactly what the driver is. I do believe regulation and
Yeah,
insurance has
absolutely.
part of it. Yeah, Simon, you could probably talk even better. You talk to some experts on this show. You probably have a better insight than I do on my
Well,
own
I
topic.
think the thing that I hear at the moment is there's a lot of talk about it, but unless they're a regulated business, there's not enough action. And I think we're still waiting for that. The regulated industries out there are taking it seriously because they have to. Again,
Yep.
it's that until you've got a big stick hitting you with something, it's very rare that people actually do anything about it, isn't it?
Yep. Absolutely. So appreciate the feedback on this slide. I was nervous how this would communicate. So I love the feedback in real time with you, Simon. So diving
Perfect.
into the next one here. So I want to prove hardening was worth it. This is intended to be a little interactive. I'm going to probably skip that for purposes of this, but the goal here is preventing unauthorized access. Simon, I know you're a Windows internals expert. Can you think of any settings that
I
might
did. I did mention I
limit?
used a Mac, right? Yeah.
I hear you. So looking at that, right? This is your goal, right? This is one of the things hardening can provide. And how does it do that, right? These are just 3 examples of settings you can change, whether this is manual with Senteon or whatever else, right? You're going to want to make sure the user rights assignments are configured correctly. So this first one here, access this computer from the network. You're going to want this to be only admins and authorized users, right? This
Yeah.
is not for everyone, right? This is not for things you don't know about. UAC behavior, right? This is the ability to escalate your privileges and install applications that need additional approval, right? If you do not have this configured, the bad actor, when compromised, can do whatever they want, right?
Yeah.
And anything that ever says anonymous access should definitely be restricted. And it will be quite funny how often we've actually seen this configured without the business knowing about it when we got there. A lot of fun stories I can share. The next thing here is reducing the attack surface, right? I talked about this. That is the literal point of hardening is eliminating services you're not using and configuring the settings that you don't need. So some examples here is the deprecated networking protocol, SMB1, right? WDigest, CHOP, right? I'm not going to dive into the technical pieces of all this, but these are all settings that are achieving the greater goal, right? My favorite, I mean, actually, I really like talking about this one. Improving system performance. You're like, hey, Zach, I have enough security. I can't handle anything more. What if I could tell you your systems will run better? You will literally, because you're eliminating the things you're not using, you're allowing for more resources to free up, right? So you
Yeah.
want to disable these certain things so that your employees can function better, can do things faster, right? And if you do have a lot of PowerShell scripts, using Senteon or another solution can eliminate those logon scripts from running at boot up every single time. So you're saving system resources and you're being able to save more time. Last thing here, Simon, you could talk about this last point for me, but it's all about governance, making sure these settings are actually in place, right? Making sure you have a password policy, making sure you're not using personal Microsoft accounts. So again, this is designed for an interactive workshop where we kind of have a discussion on this stuff. But I mean, going through it, Simon, how do we feel about these high level and the relationship?
I'm feeling like I've got an absolute shed load of work to do on my devices, and you're making me really nervous. I'm hoping
I
I'm
love it.
hoping that Apple just does it all automatically. Is that so? Or
We won't dive into the Mac world right now,
let's
but
leave that. Yeah,
once upon a time, that was the belief.
it's always been mine. Yeah,
If we don't change our belief, we don't have to do anything.
absolutely. Yeah, fixed
No, I love
mindset.
it.
That's what I'm about. Fixed mindset.
I
So
love that. All right, so diving into this, we know a thing or two because we've seen a thing or two. You might hear that phrase from somewhere else, but this is all Senteon does. We see a ton of crazy findings in our learning mode, things that the business just doesn't know is going on. We've found video editing softwares that have unique user rights assignments that were never authorized. We've found SMB1 everywhere, Xbox settings that just change with a Windows update, right? The people with the Xbox settings on don't even use it. So it's not like distracting them or anything. but we've noticed sometimes a Windows update will just randomly give you access, right? So a lot of things, built-in solutions making successful changes, but they never actually change. So this again, more storytelling, more workshop focused, but that's kind of what's going on here. And I don't know. Oh, I got one more slide before that one. And I want everyone to hear. And I asked you this before, Simon. You said this perfectly, right? You feel like you have a lot to do.
Yeah.
You do, right? Everyone here. I mean, unless you are in a DoD or CMMC contracting space, right? You might already be doing a lot of this, or if you know the word DISA STIGs, you probably are doing at least some of this. But everyone's at a different stage in their security journey. No one's behind. There's people who are definitely ahead, but like we're all in the same boat. So take the beginner, intermediate, take the advanced, and do what you will with this. Just understand the basics, start small. And if you are already doing this, start to try to automate some more stuff. And then if you're advanced, right, keep on doing what you're doing, integrate advanced tools, make sure it stays the way it should. And with,
Quick question
yeah,
from me then, Zach. We've got three, well, I suppose if you're including mobile phones, it's a lot more than that, and tablets. But we've got three devices that I could do with looking at hardening. All of them are Apple
yes,
devices. You mentioned that there's some form of free assessment on your website, I think you said. What
this
can you
is correct.
tell me more about that and how it could help me?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you head over to our website, senteon.co, you can visit and go to actually at the senteon.co, you can just go ahead. Actually, I could show this.
Oh, yes, let's do that.
Ooh, that's even
Oh,
easier.
look at that.
So
Seamless.
look at that. I think this is still sharing correctly. Can you confirm?
Yeah, perfect.
Amazing. So if you head over to our website, you will see login at the top in the menu bar. So if you head over to login here, you can actually go ahead and, oops, sorry, I'm already logged in. You will be populated here and you can have a sign up query right here. I will
Okay.
note in the scope of Senteon, I am talking about Windows today, but Simon, you are absolutely right. You need to harden your mobile devices, your phones,
Yeah.
your Macs, your Linux, right? There's hardening recommendations all over CIS. And since I am already on my browser, I want to make sure everyone understands how to find this, right? So if you do just search CIS benchmarks, you can see all of the different things that they have to harden, right? They have recommendations across so many different things. Senteon is focusing right here with the Windows desktop, Windows Server, and the browsers, but there's so many things. There's so much to review. And
Amazing.
all of this is
I
free,
put a
by the
link for
way.
that in the chat as well if anyone wants to click on it.
Absolutely. So all of this is free. CIS provides this completely free. Senteon, of course, pays a sponsorship so that we can take their recommendations and advertise. But yeah. And one other thing, while I'm already doing this, if you do head to the website, you can see the webinar series we host as well, all educational, talking about the individual settings one at a time. It is not the most exciting webinar series, but I do my absolute best. It's no InfoSec Live.
It's educational and informative with some actionable points. Am I right in saying that, Zach?
It is very actionable.
Good.
I have rewrote about 700 different policies from a security risk point of view. That 700 policies equates to introduction slides, conclusion slides. I've easily made over 1,000 PowerPoint slides on settings, and it's disgusting. But the people who watch have told me they appreciate it, and that's what keeps me
Excellent.
going.
Have you? I will have a look through your content later and pick out some bits to watch. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So kind of wrapping up here, I don't think the audio is probably playing through, but if you have seen this ad by the wonderful Progressive, she's talking about wanting to go get tacos, right? So you want to go get tacos. The gentleman says, no, it's too saucy, it's messy. And she goes, yeah, you're right. Tacos are not great. They're tasty, they're flavorful, and it changes the mind of the person. He's like, actually, let's go get tacos, right? So go sell hardening. Go to your leadership, right? You know, you want to, no, I don't want to do this, right? You don't want things to be secure, smoother, right? Tell them the benefits. It make it fun, right? And I'm happy to drop the link and plug Progressive, right? Great ads. They're incredible. And the last thing here, going back to your question, we do have free resources. I did provide the CIS resources here, general hardening resources that Senteon did create, completely free, no subscription required. And then if you do want the free reporting that I'm happy to give and offer to the InfoSec Live community, you can generate free assessments on your own. No contract required or anything else, but you will have to sign up with your information. So that's the first QR code, and then it goes down to the right. So very, very thankful for the opportunity to practice here today, brother.
It's my pleasure.
You are a hero
It's
to
my
the
pleasure,
newbies.
and I think you've absolutely nailed it. And not only have you got a practice session in, you've also educated and informed the InfoSec Live community and further afield. So a massive, massive thank you for that. Unless you've got any more words of wisdom or insights for our audience, I'm going to wrap things up, go downstairs, have my lasagna and chips for dinner before trying to herd my children into their beds this evening.
I love it. No, that is all my final thoughts. I guess final thought, add me on LinkedIn. Happy to drop that in the chat. All of my webinars are also hosted completely free via YouTube and via LinkedIn. So connect with me there. I'm happy to continuously share the education. It's literally what I do.
Let me just get your LinkedIn link and let's drop that in the chat there. Zach, thank you so much for taking the time to come on. Audience, thank you again for being engaging, dropping in with the questions. If anyone's got any questions who are watching this on the replay, Zach's LinkedIn profile is in the chat there where you can connect with him and ask questions directly. And again, throughout the show, you'll see the QR codes come up to check out Senteon. So Zach, thank you so much for taking the time to come on. Look forward to catching up with you after your vacation in a couple of weeks' time.
I appreciate the time, man. Thank you for having me on, and thank you to the great audience. You've built an incredible community,
Thanks,
man.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great night. See you later.
Bye.